Marcus Hale adjusted the focus on his camera lens, squinting against the dying light of the setting sun that bathed the vast plains in hues of amber and crimson. The barn stood alone in the distance, an architectural relic of another time, its silhouette jagged against the horizon. Weathered wood and rusted nails held together by sheer will, it seemed, a monument to secrets long buried. Locals spoke of curses and ghostly apparitions, but Marcus was undeterred. To him, it was another story waiting to be told, another chance to prove himself in a world that had so often dismissed his ambitions. An aspiring documentarian in his early 30s, Marcus carried the weight of unrealized potential. Years of chasing inconsequential stories had left him yearning for something substantive, something that would make his late father proud. Fear was both a familiar companion and a motivator. Ever since childhood nightmares of being lost in the dark haunted him. Yet, his greatest fear was fading into obscurity, never making his mark. Determination masked his insecurities, and with each step toward the ominous structure he sought to silence the doubting voices that echoed in his mind. As he approached the barn, the air thickened with an unnatural stillness. The whisper of the wind through the tall grasses faded, and the distant call of a hawk abruptly ceased. Marcus felt a chill crawl up his spine but brushed it aside, attributing it to the cool evening air. The barn's facade was scarred with peculiar markings, and the ground beneath his feet was littered with fragments of pottery and bones bleached white by the sun. The door, surprisingly intact, yielded to his touch with a long, mournful creak, revealing a cavernous darkness that seemed to swallow the fading daylight. Inside, the scent of damp earth and decay pervaded his senses. He illuminated the space with his flashlight, revealing walls adorned with cryptic symbols carved deep into the wood, spirals, triangles, and unfamiliar scripts that seemed to shift when he looked away. Strange artifacts hung from the rafters, talismans made of twisted metal, dream catchers with feathers blackened by time, and jars filled with substances he couldn't identify. An unease settled in his stomach as electronic interference crackled through his equipment. The camera's display distorted, frames skipping and looping in nonsensical sequences. Suddenly, the barn shuddered as if struck by an unseen force. The heavy door slammed shut behind him, plunging the room into darkness before his flashlight flickered back to life. Marcus's heartbeat thundered in his ears. He lunged for the door, but it held fast, immovable. Panic ignited within him as whispers filled the air, indistinct at first, then coalescing into a cacophony of voices, speaking in tongues long forgotten. The symbols on the walls glowed with an ethereal light, casting writhing shadows that danced like specters. Time itself seemed to unravel. His watch hand spun erratically, and the beam of his flashlight stretched and warped as though bending through a prism. Desperation drove him deeper into the barn's bowels, each step heavy as if wading through water. Marcus stumbled upon a hidden staircase leading downward, a structure that should not have existed in a simple barn. Compelled by a mix of terror and insatiable curiosity, he descended into a chamber where the air was thick and cold. At the center stood an altar draped with a tattered cloth, atop which rested an old journal bound in cracked leather. He opened it to find pages filled with illustrations of rituals designed to manipulate time and cheat death. The barn's owner, a man consumed by grief and obsession, had sought to trap his soul and those of others in an eternal loop. Realization dawned with horrifying clarity. Marcus was entangled in the very ritual meant to ensnare wandering souls. The barn was not just a building, but a conduit, a nexus where time and space converged. The voices grew louder, more insistent, and spectral figures emerged from the shadows, lost souls replaying their final moments in an endless cycle of despair. Determined not to share their fate, he rifled through the journal, searching for a way to break the curse. The solution, obscured and incomplete, hinted at destroying the anchors that bound the ritual to this place. Summoning every ounce of courage, Marcus began to tear down the artifacts, smashing jars and ripping down talismans. The barn reacted violently, the ground quaked, and the walls groaned as if in pain. The spectral figures wailed, their forms dissolving into the swirling energy that now whipped through the chamber. Just as the maelstrom reached a fever pitch, there was a blinding flash of light, and then silence, utter and complete. Breathing hard, Marcus found himself standing outside the barn under a clear night sky dotted with stars. The oppressive weight had lifted, replaced by a profound stillness. He laughed shakily, relief washing over him. But as he made his way back across the field, something was amiss. The landscape was subtly altered. Trees stood where none had before, and the distant outline of the town seemed changed. Approaching the road, he was met by unfamiliar antique cars and people dressed in fashions from a bygone era. Panic gripped him anew as he realized the truth. While he had escaped the barn, he was not in his own time. Frantically, Marcus checked his camera, hoping for some explanation, but the device was dead. Approaching a passerby, he asked the date and felt the blood drain from his face at the response. He had been thrust a century into the past. The barn had released him from its physical confines but anchored him in a different strand of time. Stranded and anonymous, Marcus stood amid the bustling streets of the past, the weight of his predicament settling upon him. His quest for a story had become his own, an unwritten chapter lost in time.